Mafia boss slept without clothes and woke claimed by his wild Maid girl. The air inside the private room at the Obsidian Club was thick enough to choke a man, heavy with the scent of aged mahogany, cigar smoke, and fear. While the rest of Ravenshore slept under a blanket of cold fog, the city's true power brokers were awake, seated around a circular table that cost more than most people earned in a decade. Matteo Rinaldi sat at the head of that table. He did not smoke. He did not drink the amber liquid resting in the crystal glass before him. He simply watched. At 35 years old, Matteo possessed a stillness that unnerved people more than shouting ever could. He wore a charcoal suit tailored in Milan, the fabric hugging his broad shoulders without a single crease. His dark hair was swept back, severe and neat, revealing a face that might have been handsome if it were not carved from granite. His eyes, the color of frozen espresso, were fixed on the man trembling across from him. "You are telling me," Matteo said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that barely rose above a whisper, "that the shipment was lost." The man, a mid-level distributor named Carlo, wiped sweat from his receding hairline with a shaking hand. "It was the police. Boss. A raid. We had to dump it. There was no choice." Matteo leaned back in his leather chair. He adjusted the platinum cufflinks at his wrists. The movement was slow, deliberate, and terrifying. "The police do not raid that sector unless someone tips them off. Carlo. And my payroll ensures that the precinct captain is deaf, dumb, and blind on Tuesday nights. I swear, Matteo," Carlo stammered, his eyes darting to the two large men standing in the shadows behind Matteo's chair. "I do not know who talked. I just know we had to run." Matteo stood up. The room went silent. Even the ice melting in the glasses seemed to pause. He walked around the table, his Italian leather shoes making no sound on the plush carpet. He stopped behind Carlo and placed a hand on the man's shoulder. It looked like a gesture of comfort, but Carlo went rigid. "Incompetence is expensive. Carlo," Matteo said softly. "But betrayal? Betrayal is a debt that can only be paid one way." "I did not betray you," Carlo cried out. Half rising, Matteo exerted the slightest pressure on Carlo's shoulder, forcing him back down. "We will see. Until I find the leak. You are suspended from operations. You will go home. You will stay there. If you leave your house, my men will assume you are running. Do you understand?" Yes, boss." "Get him out of my sight," Matteo said, turning away before Carlo had even scrambled out of the chair. As the door clicked shut, Matteo walked to the window overlooking the city. The neon lights of Ravenshore reflected in the glass, painting his face in hues of red and blue. He felt a familiar exhaustion settling into his bones, a weight that had been there since he took the throne of the Rinaldi syndicate 10 years ago. He was the king of this city, but tonight the crown felt heavy, cold, and suffocating. He ruled through fear and precision, yet he knew the wolves were always circling, waiting for a single moment of weakness. 5 miles away, in a part of Ravenshore where the neon lights flickered and buzzed with the sound of dying electricity, Ivy Hart was on her knees. The smell of industrial-strength bleach burned her nose as she scrubbed the grout of a motel bathroom floor. Her knees ached against the cold tile, and her hands were red and raw beneath her yellow rubber gloves. Her phone, propped up on the porcelain sink, buzzed. Ivy stripped off a glove and swiped the screen, tucking the device between her ear and shoulder so she could keep scrubbing. "Hello?" she answered, breathless. "Miss Hart, this is the billing department at St. Jude's Hospital," a clipped, impersonal voice said on the other end. Ivy's stomach dropped. She stopped scrubbing. "I already told you. I am sending a check on Friday. I just need 2 more days. We show a balance of $4,000 past due for Noah Hart's last round of dialysis and the specialized medication." The voice droned on. "If we do not receive a significant payment by the end of the week, we will have to pause the non-emergency treatments. It is hospital policy." Ivy stood up, gripping the edge of the sink. Her reflection stared back at her. Tired hazel eyes, a messy ponytail of chestnut hair that had escaped its tie, and a cheap blue uniform that was 2 sizes too big. "You cannot pause it. He's 12. If he misses a week, his levels go crazy. You know that. I am just the messenger. Miss Hart, please make a payment. The line went dead. Ivy stared at the phone, fighting the urge to throw it into the toilet she had just cleaned. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, hot and angry, but she refused to let them fall. Crying did not pay bills. Crying did not save Noah. She grabbed her cleaning bucket and marched out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Half an hour later, Ivy sat in a 24-hour diner across the street, nursing a lukewarm coffee. Her friend Lena, who worked the night shift at the motel front desk, slid into the booth opposite her. "You look like you went 10 rounds with a boxing champion," Lena said, sliding a plate of fries toward Ivy. "Just the billing department," Ivy muttered, stealing a fry. "They want $4,000 by Friday. I have $300 in my account. Lena, I do not know what I am going to do. I am picking up extra shifts, but it is not enough." Lena chewed her lip, looking around the empty diner before leaning in close. "Look, I heard about something. A job." Ivy looked up. "What kind of job?" "Private housekeeping. High-end stuff. My cousin works security downtown, and he said there is an opening at the Spire. You know, that giant glass tower that looks like a spaceship?" "I know it," Ivy said. "Rich people. Good tips." "Better than tips," Lena whispered. "The base pay is triple what you make here. Triple Ivy, plus benefits." Ivy's heart skipped a beat. Triple pay would cover the debt. It would save Noah. What is the catch? Why are they hiring through word of mouth and not an agency? "The guy who owns the place is private," Lena said, waving a hand vaguely. "Some businessman, Mateo something. He hates strangers. He fired the last 3 maids because they were too loud or they touched his stuff. My cousin says if you keep your head down and clean, he pays cash bonuses." "A businessman," Ivy repeated, skepticism creeping into her voice. "Who pays in cash and fires people for being loud?" "Does it matter?" Lena asked gently. "Ivy, look at you. You are drowning." Ivy looked down at her red, chapped hands. She thought of Noah, sitting in his hospital bed, trying to do his homework while hooked up to a machine that hummed and beeped. She thought of the fear in his eyes when he asked if she was okay. "No," Ivy said, lifting her chin. "It does not matter. Give me the number." 2 days later, Ivy stood in the lobby of the Spire, feeling entirely out of place. The floors were marble, polished to a mirror shine. The air smelled of expensive lilies and money. She wore her best pair of jeans, which still had a small rip in the knee, and a white button-down shirt she had ironed 3 times. She approached the security desk. "I am here for an interview with Mr. Rinaldi." The guard did not even look up. He pointed toward a private elevator bank. "Penthouse. Scan your ID at the panel." The elevator ride made her ears pop. When the doors slid open, Ivy stepped directly into a living room that was larger than her entire apartment building. The walls were made of floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a panoramic view of the city's skyline. Modern art, slashes of red and black paint on massive canvases, hung on the few solid walls. It was beautiful, cold, and utterly silent. "You are late." The voice came from a man standing near a black marble pillar. He was huge, with a shaved head and a neck as thick as a tree trunk. He wore a black suit that strained against his muscles. This was Damon Cole, though Ivy did not know his name yet. Ivy checked her cheap plastic watch. "I am 2 minutes early." "Mr. Rinaldi prefers 5 minutes early." Damon grunted, stepping forward to block her path. He looked her up and down, his eyes narrowing at her sneakers. "You are the applicant? You look like a stiff breeze would blow you over." Ivy straightened her spine. "And you look like you are auditioning for an action movie." But I did not say anything. Damon blinked, clearly unused to being back-talked by 20-year-old girls in ripped jeans. Before he could respond, a set of double mahogany doors opened on the far side of the room. Matteo Rinaldi stepped out. If the room was cold, he was the glacier it was built on. He wore a navy vest over a white shirt. His sleeves rolled up to his elbows to reveal forearms that were surprisingly muscular for a businessman. He held a file in one hand. He stopped when he saw them. his gaze sweeping over Ivy with a detached, clinical assessment. "Damon," Mateo said. His voice was quiet, yet it carried across the massive room instantly. "Is there a problem?" "She is small, boss," Damon said, not taking his eyes off Ivy. "And she has an attitude." "I do not have an attitude," Ivy corrected, stepping around the mountain of a man to face the owner of the penthouse. "I have a work ethic, and I am here to clean, not to lift weights." Mateo's dark eyes locked onto hers. Most people looked away when Mateo stared at them. It was a survival instinct. But Ivy was too tired and too desperate to be intimidated by a handsome man in a fancy vest. She held his gaze, her chin tilted up. Mateo walked closer, stopping a few feet away. He smelled of sandalwood and something crisp, like winter air. "Ivy Hart," he said, glancing at the file in his hand. 22 years old, no criminal record, previous employment at the Bayside Motel. Fired from a diner 6 months ago for pouring coffee on a customer. "He grabbed me," Ivy said flatly. "The coffee was accidental. Mostly a flicker of something. Amusement, respect, passed through Mateo's eyes, gone so fast she almost missed it. "My home is not a motel. Miss Hart, the things in this room are worth more than your life earnings. Silence and discretion are not suggestions here. They are requirements." Ivy looked around the room, noting the 3 other men standing by the exits, their jackets bulging slightly at the waist. She looked back at Mateo, her gaze dropping to the scar that ran faintly along his jawline. "You have a lot of security for a businessman," she said. The words left her mouth before she could stop them. The room went deadly quiet. Damon took a step forward, his hand twitching toward his side. Mateo held up a hand to stop him. He did not look angry. He looked interested. "Wealth attracts envy," Mateo said smoothly. "I take precautions. Guys with this many guards do not sell insurance," Ivy said. It was a dangerous thing to say. She knew it, but she was tired of rich people pretending the world was polite when it wasn't. Mateo let the silence hang. He studied her face, looking for fear. He saw the pulse jumping in her neck, betraying her nerves, but her feet were planted firm. She was terrified, but she was standing her ground. "No," Mateo said softly, "I do not sell insurance. Does that bother you?" This was the test. Ivy knew that if she flinched, if she asked what he really did, she would be out on the street, and Noah would not get his treatment. "No, nuts," she shrugged, shifting her weight to one hip. "I do not care if you sell Girl Scout cookies. I need the paycheck. As long as the check clears, I will scrub the blood out of the carpets if I have to." Mateo's eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. "Let us hope it does not come to that." He closed the file. "The pay is $2,000 a week. Cash." Ivy's breath hitched. That was enough. That was more than enough. "However," Mateo continued, his voice dropping an octave, becoming steel, "I have rules. Rule number 1. You do not ask questions about my visitors or my business. Rule number 2, you never enter my bedroom. Consider that door locked to you forever. Rule number 3, when I am asleep, you are invisible. You do not wake me. You do not wander." Ivy blinked. "No bedroom? No wandering? You sound like a vampire." Damon choked on a cough. Mateo stared at her, and for a second, the corner of his mouth twitched upward. It was a faint ghost of a smirk that made him look 5 years younger. "I value my privacy, Miss Hart," Mateo said. "Do we have an agreement?" "Yes," Ivy said quickly. "When do I start?" "Now," Mateo said. He turned and walked back toward his office. "Damon will show you the supplies." Ivy's first day was a blur of dusting surfaces that were already clean and polishing glass that was already clear. The penthouse was immaculate, almost sterile. It felt like a museum, not a home. But as the hours passed, she began to find small cracks in Matteo Rinaldi's armor. In the corner of the living room, hidden behind a sleek modern sculpture, she found an old turntable. Next to it was a stack of vinyl records. Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Thelonious Monk. The jackets were worn at the edges, handled often. On a bookshelf in the library, tucked behind a row of leather-bound encyclopedias, was a small, silver-framed photograph. It showed a teenage boy, clearly Mateo, though his face was softer, less guarded, with his arm around a young girl who was laughing at the camera. They looked happy. It was a jarring contrast to the cold man she had met earlier. And then, in the kitchen pantry, behind the imported pasta and organic quinoa, she found a family-sized package of double-stuffed chocolate cookies. Half the package was gone. Later that afternoon, when Mateo came into the kitchen to get a glass of water, Ivy was wiping down the granite island. "Everything is satisfactory?" he asked, not looking at her. "Yes, sir," Ivy said. She paused, then couldn't help herself. "Although, for a vampire, you have a surprising sweet tooth. You are almost out of cookies." Mateo froze, the glass halfway to his mouth. He looked at her, then at the pantry door. A faint flush of color touched his cheekbones. It was the most human reaction she had seen from him all day. "Put them on the shopping list," he muttered, drinking his water quickly and leaving the room. Ivy smiled to herself. He was terrifying. Yes, but maybe he wasn't a robot. Night fell over Ravenshore, turning the skyline into a grid of amber and white lights. Ivy was finishing up in the library, dusting the high shelves, when she heard voices coming from the hallway. She froze. The tone was not casual. It was low, sharp, and laced with violence. "They crossed the line at the docks. Mateo," Damon's voice rumbled. "The Kovac crew. They are testing the perimeter. If we do not push back tonight, they will think we are weak." Ivy pressed herself against the bookshelf, holding her breath. She knew she should cover her ears, knew she should leave, but her feet wouldn't move. "Kovac is reckless," Mateo's voice replied. It sounded like ice cracking. "He wants a war. He wants me to react with emotion. I will not give him that satisfaction. They hurt one of our runners," Damon argued. "Then we hurt 2 of theirs," Mateo said. The lethality in his voice sent a shiver down Ivy's spine. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. "But we do it quietly. No noise. No headlines. Make them disappear." Ivy's heart hammered against her ribs. Make them disappear. This wasn't just a businessman with security. This was a man who ordered deaths like he was ordering dinner. The footsteps stopped outside the library door. Ivy quickly grabbed her duster and started aggressively cleaning a bust of Julius Caesar. Mateo walked in. He had removed his vest and tie. His top button was undone, revealing the hollow of his throat. He looked at Ivy, and she saw the mask slip. For a moment, the cold, ruthless mafia boss was gone. In his place was a man who looked incredibly tired. There were dark circles under his eyes, and the lines around his mouth were deep with tension. He looked like someone carrying the weight of the world, and for a split second, he looked at her not as an employee, but as another human being in a lonely room. Ivy stopped dusting. She clutched the feather duster like a shield. I am just finishing up," she stammered, her earlier boldness replaced by the realization of exactly who she was alone in a room with. Mateo stared at her. He rubbed a hand over his face, a gesture of exhaustion. "Go home, Miss Hart," he said quietly. "It is late. The driver is waiting downstairs to take you back." "Thank you," Ivy whispered. She hurried past him, smelling the scent of expensive scotch and gunpowder on his clothes. As she reached the door, she glanced back. Mateo was standing by the window, staring out at the city he ruled, his reflection a lonely ghost in the glass. He looked powerful. Yes. But more than anything, he looked like he was trapped in a cage of his own making. Ivy stepped into the elevator, her heart still racing. She had the money for Noah. She had the job. But as the doors closed, she knew she had stepped into something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. And the scariest part wasn't the violence she had overheard. It was the strange, aching pull she felt toward the sad, dangerous man standing alone in the dark. The rhythm of the penthouse was deceptive. To an outsider, it was a palace of glass and silence, floating high above the grit of Ravenshore. But to Ivy Hart, who had spent the last 2 weeks scrubbing its marble floors and dusting its expensive art, it was a fortress. Her days settled into a strange, tense routine. She would arrive early, scanning her ID at the elevator, and ascend into a world that felt entirely separate from the one she lived in. She cleaned around men who looked like walking nightmares, heavy-set guys with tattoos climbing up their necks and guns bulging beneath tailored jackets. They never spoke to her. They barely looked at her. To them, she was part of the furniture, just another object in Matteo Rinaldi's collection. Ivy preferred it that way. It made it easier to do her job, collect her cash envelope at the end of the week, and immediately wire 80% of it to St. Jude's Hospital. Yet, despite her fear, curiosity began to itch beneath her skin. She watched Matteo when he thought no one was looking. She saw the way he rubbed his temples after a long call, the way he stood by the window for hours staring at nothing, and the way the terrifying men in the hallway straightened their spines whenever he walked by. He was a king in a high tower, but he seemed to be the prisoner of his own kingdom. It was a Tuesday evening, raining hard enough that the city lights below were smeared into watery streaks. When the routine broke, Ivy had stayed late to finish oiling the wood paneling in the library. The penthouse was quiet. The usual guards posted outside the front doors rather than inside. She assumed Matteo was out at one of his late-night meetings, the kind that usually ended with him smelling like cigar smoke and cold winter air. She picked up her bucket and mop, heading toward the kitchen to dump the water. As she passed the open door of the living room, movement caught her eye. Matteo was sitting on the edge of the sprawling leather sofa. The only light came from the city glow filtering through the rain-slicked windows. A bottle of amber whiskey sat on the coffee table, uncorked, next to a half-empty glass. He was not wearing a shirt. Ivy froze, her grip tightening on the mop handle. It was the first time she had seen him without the armor of his suits. His back was broad, muscles corded and tense beneath olive-toned skin that was mapped with faint white scars, old stories written in violence. But it was the fresh mark that drew her eye. A sprawling, angry bruise, the color of a thundercloud, wrapped around his left rib cage. He hissed a breath through his teeth as he tried to pour more whiskey, his movements stiff and pained. Ivy should have kept walking. Rule number 1 was to ask no questions. Rule number 3 was to be invisible. But her mouth, as usual, was faster than her survival instinct. "Are you planning on bleeding over my freshly mopped floor?" she asked. "Because pine cleaner does not get blood out of Italian leather." Matteo stiffened. He did not jump. Men like him did not jump. He turned his head slowly, his dark eyes locking onto her. For a second, Ivy thought she was fired, or worse. Then, a low, rough sound scraped from his throat. He was laughing. It was a dry, humorless sound, but it was there. "It is not bleeding, Miss Hart," Matteo said, his voice raspy. "It is just bruising. Internal bleeding stays on the inside, hence the name." Ivy set the bucket down with a definitive clunk. She walked into the room, wiping her hands on her jeans. "That does not make it better. That makes it worse. Have you seen a doctor?" "I have no need for doctors," Matteo muttered, taking a sip of the whiskey. He winced as the liquid hit his throat. Or perhaps it was the movement of his arm pulling at his ribs. It is a cracked rib. It heals, or it does not. "It heals wrong if you do not wrap it," Ivy said, her tone no nonsense. She had spent enough nights in the ER waiting room with Noah to know basic first aid better than most medical students. "Where is the first aid kit? The real one, not the little box with the cartoon Band-Aids I found in the kitchen." Matteo stared at her, seemingly baffled by her audacity. "Master bathroom under the sink." Ivy marched past him, retrieved the kit, which was more like a field medic's trauma bag, and returned to the living room. She set it on the coffee table and knelt in front of him. "Arms up," she commanded. "I am fine," Matteo protested, though he lacked his usual icy authority. "You are drinking dinner and you cannot breathe without flinching," Ivy countered. "Arms up. Unless you want me to call Damon to help you." Matteo let out a sigh of defeat and slowly lifted his left arm, resting his hand on the back of the sofa. The movement stretched the skin over his ribs, and Ivy hissed in sympathy. The bruise was nasty, a deep violet blooming into sickly yellow at the edges. "This looks like you got hit with a pipe," she murmured, opening a roll of compression bandage. "Something like that," Matteo said. He watched her as she worked. The air in the room seemed to shift as Ivy leaned in. She had to get close to wrap the bandage properly. Her knees brushed against his dress trousers. The scent of him, whiskey, rain, and the metallic tang of adrenaline filled her senses. "Deep breath," she instructed softly. "Let it out slowly." Matteo obeyed. As he exhaled, Ivy pressed the bandage against his side, winding it firmly around his torso. Her fingertips grazed his warm skin. Careful and gentle despite her earlier sharp tone, she could feel the heat radiating off him, the solid, hard muscle beneath the injury. Matteo looked down. From this angle, all he could see was the top of her head, the stray wisps of hair escaping her ponytail. He felt her small, rough hands moving with surprising tenderness against his battered side. It had been years since anyone had touched him without wanting something: money, power, or pleasure. This touch asked for nothing. It was purely, startlingly caring. Ivy finished the wrap and secured the clip. She smoothed her hand over the bandage to check the fit. Her palm rested flat against his chest for a heartbeat too long. Beneath her hand, she felt the heavy, steady thud of his heart. She looked up. Matteo was watching her. His face was inches from hers. In the dim light, his eyes were not cold. They were dark, intense, and filled with a raw, unguarded hunger that had nothing to do with food. Time seemed to stretch, thick and heavy like syrup. Ivy could count the eyelashes framing his eyes. She could see the flecks of gold in his dark irises. Her breath hitched in her throat. She became acutely aware of the silence in the penthouse, of how alone they were, of the heat of his body warming the space between them. For a moment, neither of them moved. The attraction was a physical weight, pressing down on them. It would be so easy to lean forward, just 3 inches, then reality crashed back in. Ivy realized her hand was still resting on the bare chest of a mafia boss. She yanked her hand back as if she had been burned. "There," she stammered, scrambling to her feet and taking a large step back. That should help with the pain. Keep it tight." Matteo cleared his throat. He reached for his shirt, which was draped over the arm of the sofa, and pulled it on, covering the bandage and the skin she had just touched. The mask of the indifferent businessman slid back into place, but it didn't fit quite as perfectly as before. "Thank you, Miss Hart," he said. His voice was cool, but he didn't look at the file on the table. He looked at her. "Just doing my job," Ivy said, her voice an octave higher than usual. I will go finish the library." She fled the room, but she could feel his gaze burning into her back until she turned the corner. The fragile peace of the penthouse did not last. 2 days later, Ivy sat in a plastic chair in the hallway of St. Jude's ES, her head in her hands. "I do not understand," she said to the doctor standing over her. "I paid $2,000 on Monday." "Doctor," Evans sighed, looking at his clipboard. He looked sympathetic, which Ivy hated. Sympathy did not cure kidneys. "I know, Ivy, and we appreciate it, but the new medication protocol is expensive. The insurance company denied the claim again. We are appealing, but until then, the hospital board requires a 50% down payment on the projected cost." "How much?" Ivy asked, her voice hollow. $6,000 more by the end of the week. Or we have to switch him back to the generic dialysis, and you know how his body reacts to that." Ivy felt like the floor was tilting. Noah had spent 3 days vomiting the last time they tried the generic treatment. He had looked so small, so pale. She couldn't watch that again. "I will get it," Ivy said, standing up. Her legs felt shaky. "I will get the money." She walked out of the hospital into the blinding afternoon sun, panic clawing at her throat. She had used almost every cent of her savings. The job with Matteo paid well, but not fast enough. A dark thought crept into her mind. "You work for a criminal?" She had seen the cash in the penthouse. She had seen the envelopes Damon handed out to the guards. Money flowed through that place like water. But with the money came the violence. The bruised ribs, the midnight meetings, the talk of making people disappear. If she stayed, if she got deeper into Mateo's world, would the danger eventually follow her home? Would the Kovac crew decide that the maid was a weak link? Noah was helpless in that hospital bed. If anything happened to him because of who she worked for, she couldn't risk it. She had to quit. She would find another way. Maybe 3 jobs. Maybe she would sell her car. The next day, the penthouse felt suffocating. Ivy moved through the rooms like a ghost, avoiding eye contact with everyone. She dropped a vase in the hallway, luckily it didn't break, and forgot to start the dishwasher. Mateo noticed. He was sitting in his home office, the door open, reviewing a stack of ledgers. When Ivy walked past with a laundry basket, he called out to her, "Miss Hart, a moment." Ivy froze. She took a deep breath, set the basket down, and walked into the office. Mateo sat behind a massive mahogany desk that was cluttered with papers, maps, and open laptops. He looked sharp, focused, and irritated. "You have dusted the same shelf in the hallway 3 times in the last hour," Mateo said, not looking up from his papers. "And you look like you're about to be sick. What is the matter?" Ivy clasped her hands in front of her. "I am fine. Mr. Rinaldi." Mateo finally looked up. His gaze was piercing. "I pay you for honesty. Ivy, do not lie to me." The use of her first name startled her. It chipped away at her resolve. She felt the tears pricking her eyes, stupid, angry tears of frustration. "I think—" Ivy started, her voice trembling. She cleared her throat. "I think I need to give my notice." Mateo leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking. His expression darkened. "You are quitting? Why? Is the pay insufficient?" "The pay is great," Ivy said quickly. "It is not that." "Then what? Is it Damon? I can speak to him." "No," Ivy said. She looked down at her sneakers. "It is. It is everything, the guards, the bruises, the phone calls I hear." She looked up, her hazel eyes pleading for him to understand. "I have a brother. He's sick. He's all I have. I cannot bring this world to his doorstep. I need to keep him safe." Mateo went still. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the terror behind her defiance. It was a look he knew well. It was the look of someone desperate to protect the only thing they loved. He opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a thick, white envelope. He tossed it onto the mahogany surface. It landed with a heavy slap. "There is $5,000 in there," Mateo said flatly. "Consider it a signing bonus. Use it for your brother. Stay. You are safe here." Ivy stared at the envelope. It was the answer to her prayers. It was Noah's treatment for a month. All she had to do was take it. But something in her chest rebelled. If she took his money as a gift, she belonged to him. It was charity. It was blood money given out of pity. "No," Ivy said. Mateo blinked, surprised. "Excuse me? I do not want your charity," Ivy said, her voice strengthening. "I do not want a handout. That is how people get owned." She took a step toward the desk, her hands gripping the edge. "If you want me to stay, then let me earn it. Give me more hours. Give me more work. I will clean the ceilings. I will organize this mess of an office. I will work double shifts, but I will not take money I did not work for." Mateo stared at her for a long moment. He saw the pride in her rigid posture, the fire in her eyes. She was poor, exhausted, and terrified, but she refused to be bought. A strange respect unfurled in his chest. In his world, everyone had a price. Everyone had a handout, except, apparently, for his maid. "You are a stubborn woman, Ivy Hart," Mateo said softly. "It runs in the family," she shot back. Mateo sighed, running a hand through his hair. He gestured to the chaotic piles of paper covering his desk and the surrounding cabinets. "Fine. You want to work? My filing system is a disaster. My previous assistant was, let us say, removed abruptly. I need everything organized, chronologically and by sector. It will take all night." "I charge overtime," Ivy said. "Deal." The sun went down, and the city lights came up, but inside the office, time seemed to stop. For hours, the only sounds were the rustling of paper and the scratching of Mateo's pen. Ivy sat on the floor, surrounded by stacks of files, sorting receipts, shipping manifests, and invoices. Mateo worked at his desk, occasionally handing her a new stack. At first, the silence was awkward. But as the clock ticked past midnight, the tension began to bleed away. "You have terrible handwriting," Ivy noted, squinting at a scribbled note on a file folder. "Is this a 3 or a 5? "It is a 5, Mateo said, not looking up. "And my handwriting is efficient." "It is chicken scratch," Ivy muttered, placing the file in the 2021 Ayer pile. "My brother writes better than this, and he is 12. Mateo paused. He put his pen down. "What is wrong with him, your brother?" Ivy hesitated. She held a file to her chest like a shield. "His kidneys are failing. Autoimmune condition. He's been sick since he was 6. "I'm sorry," Mateo said. It wasn't a platitude. He sounded genuine. "He's tough," Ivy said, a small smile touching her lips. "He never complains. He just wants to play video games and eat pizza, which he is not allowed to have. My sister was like that," Mateo said quietly. Ivy looked up. "Rosa?" Mateo looked at her sharply. "How do you know her name?" "The photo," Ivy said, pointing toward the library. "The one of you two." Mateo's expression softened. He picked up a paperweight, turning it over in his hands. "She was fearless, even when she was sick. She used to sneak out of the house to feed the stray cats in the alley, even though my father forbade it." "Was?" Ivy asked gently. "She died when she was 16, Mateo said. His voice was devoid of emotion, but his eyes were dark with ancient grief. "I was supposed to protect her. I failed." Ivy felt a pang of sorrow in her chest. She saw the parallel instantly. He had lost the person he was supposed to protect. She was fighting with everything she had not to lose hers. "You were a kid," Ivy said softly. "You cannot fight fate." "In my world," Mateo said, looking at her with intensity, "you fight everything, fate included." They fell into silence again, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It was a companionable silence. Two lonely people sitting in a tower, surrounded by the evidence of a criminal empire, sharing the weight of their ghosts. Ivy continued sorting, her eyes growing heavy. The rhythmic sound of the rain against the window was hypnotic. She leaned her head back against the sofa cushions just for a moment, intending to rest her eyes. Mateo finished the last report at 3 in the morning. He rubbed his burning eyes and stretched, his bruised ribs giving a dull throb of protest. "Ivy," he said, "you should go home. It is late." There was no answer. Mateo stood up and walked around the desk. Ivy was fast asleep on the leather sofa. She was curled up in a tight ball, her cheek pressed against a cushion, her hand still clutching a file folder. She looked incredibly young, without the defiant glare or the worry lines on her forehead. She looked peaceful. Mateo stared at her. He knew he should wake her up. He knew he should call the driver to take her home. But he couldn't bring himself to disturb her. He walked to the closet and pulled out a cashmere throw blanket. He approached the sofa quietly, his movements silent on the thick rug. Gently. He pried the file folder from her fingers and set it on the table. He draped the blanket over her, tucking it around her shoulders. A strand of chestnut hair had fallen across her face. Without thinking, Mateo reached out. His knuckles brushed against her cheek, skin soft and warm. He tucked the hair behind her ear, his hand lingering for a fraction of a second. A strange sensation tightened in his chest. It wasn't pain. It was something more dangerous. It was tenderness. He stepped back, staring at the sleeping maid who had barged into his life and refused to be intimidated. She was a liability. She was a weakness. Damon was right. He should fire her. But as he watched her sleep, safe under his roof, Mateo knew he wouldn't. He turned off the lamp, leaving the room bathed in the soft glow of the city, and walked out, leaving the door slightly ajar so he could hear if she woke. The week had been a relentless siege of nerves and shadow boxing. The Kovac crew was no longer just testing the perimeter. They were throwing stones at the glass walls of Matteo Rinaldi's empire. There had been 3 intercepted shipments in 4 days, a firebombing at a warehouse in the industrial district, and a threat pinned to the front door of one of his captains with a knife. Mateo had spent the last 96 hours putting out fires, rearranging supply lines, and staring at maps until the lines blurred into a headache that sat behind his eyes like a lead weight. It was past 2 in the morning when the private elevator finally deposited him into the silent sanctuary of the penthouse. The air inside was cool and smelled faintly of lemon oil. Ivy's doing. The silence should have been comforting, but tonight it felt heavy. Mateo walked into his bedroom, his movements mechanical. He did not bother to turn on the lights. The ambient glow of the city filtering through the rain-lashed windows was enough. He stripped off his jacket, tossing it onto a chair, then the tie, the vest, the shirt. Each layer removed felt like peeling off a piece of iron armor that had been bolted to his skin. He was exhausted beyond the point of reason. His bruised ribs, which had been healing, throbbed with a dull, persistent ache from days of tension. He stripped off the rest of his clothing, needing to feel nothing against his skin, needing to be free of the constraints of the suit and the holster and the persona of the boss. He collapsed into the massive bed, burying his face in the cool pillows. The sheets were crisp and clean. He pulled the duvet up to his waist, leaving his torso bare to the cool air. Outside. A storm was brewing over Ravenshore, the wind howling against the reinforced glass. But Mateo barely heard it. Within seconds, the darkness swallowed him whole. Downstairs in the small staff suite adjacent to the laundry room that Mateo had insisted she use on nights when the weather was too dangerous to drive. Ivy Hart was awake. The storm had intensified rapidly. Thunder rattled the skyscraper, a low, guttural boom that vibrated through the floorboards. Ivy sat on the edge of the twin bed, reading a paperback novel by the light of a small lamp. She couldn't sleep. The tension in the penthouse over the last week had leaked into everything, infecting the air like a gas leak. She had seen the way Mateo looked when he left in the mornings, grim, pale. His jaw set so hard she worried his teeth would crack. Suddenly, the world went black. The lamp flickered and died. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchenette cut out. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy and suffocating. Then, a siren sliced through the dark. It wasn't the building's fire alarm. It was a sharp, piercing electronic shriek coming from the upper level, the penthouse security grid. Ivy's heart hammered against her ribs. She scrambled off the bed, fumbling for her phone to use the flashlight. Her first thought was not for herself. It was for the conversation she had overheard days ago about assassins and breached perimeters. "Mateo," she whispered. She didn't think. She didn't remember the rules about staying put. She didn't consider that a maid with a flashlight was useless against armed intruders. She just ran. She took the service stairs, her sneakers squeaking on the metal steps. The emergency lights in the stairwell flickered with a ghostly, nauseating green glow. The siren was louder up here, pulsing in time with the adrenaline rushing through her veins. She burst into the main hallway of the penthouse. It was pitch black, the floor-to-ceiling windows showing nothing but the violent churning of the storm outside. "Mateo!" She screamed, her voice cracking. There was no answer. No gunshots, no shouting, just the relentless wailing of the alarm. She ran toward the master bedroom. The double doors were closed. Rule number 2 echoed in her head: never enter my bedroom. She shoved the doors open. "Mateo!" She swept the beam of her flashlight across the room. It was vast, dominated by a bed that looked like an island in a sea of dark carpet. At that exact moment, a jagged fork of lightning split the sky outside. The flash illuminated the room in stark, blue-white clarity, instantly followed by a crash of thunder that shook the walls. The light revealed Mateo. He was not fighting off attackers. He was sprawled on the bed, naked. The sheet was tangled around his hips, pushed dangerously low, leaving the long lines of his legs and the broad expanse of his chest exposed to the cool air. Ivy froze, her hand clapping over her mouth. The alarm suddenly cut out, likely a system reset or a generator kicking in, leaving the room in a ringing silence that was somehow louder than the noise. She should have turned around. She should have run out the door and pretended she had never seen him like this. Vulnerable. Stripped of his power. A man instead of a monument, but he was moving. Mateo was tossing his head against the pillow, his breathing ragged and harsh. His hands were gripping the sheets so tightly his knuckles were white. "No," he muttered, his voice a broken rasp that sounded nothing like the cold baritone she knew. "Rosa, stay down, stay down." He was trapped in a nightmare. Ivy lowered the flashlight, pointing the beam at the floor so it wouldn't blind him. She took a hesitant step forward. The lightning flashed again, softer this time, and she saw the sheen of sweat on his forehead, the way his muscles were coiled tight as if he were bracing for a blow. "Mateo?" she called softly. He didn't wake. He flinched, turning his head sharply to the side. "Not her," he groaned. "Take me. Not her." The pain in his voice tore at Ivy's chest. It was the sound of a wound that had never healed. She forgot about his nakedness. She forgot about the rules. She only saw a person in agony. She rushed to the side of the bed. "Mateo, wake up. You are dreaming." She reached out, intending to shake his shoulder, but stopped inches from his skin. He looked ready to strike out at anything that touched him. But she couldn't leave him like this. He looked like he was fighting a war all alone in the dark. "It is just a dream," she whispered, sitting gingerly on the edge of the mattress. She placed her hand on his shoulder. His skin was burning hot. Mateo gasped, his body jerking, but he didn't wake. He thrashed, his arm flinging out, nearly hitting her. He was sinking deeper into the memory, drowning in it. "Mateo," Ivy said more firmly. She grabbed his wrist, trying to stop him from hurting himself. "Mateo, listen to me. You are safe." It wasn't working. He was too far gone, muttering names of dead men and lost family. Instinct took over. It was the same instinct that made her crawl into bed with Noah when the pain from the dialysis was too much and he couldn't stop shivering. She knew that sometimes. Words weren't enough. Sometimes the body needed an anchor to know it was still in the land of the living. Ivy kicked off her sneakers. She lay down on top of the covers, fully clothed in her jeans and oversized t-shirt. She moved close to him, sliding her arm carefully over his chest, avoiding his bruised ribs, and pressed her front against his side. "I am here," she whispered into the darkness, her hand flattening over his heart. "I am right here. Come back." She held him, her body a solid, warm weight against his thrashing. She hooked her leg over his shin, pinning him gently, grounding him. Slowly, the tension began to bleed out of him. The muttering stopped, his breathing hitched, then deepened, then he went completely still. Mateo woke with a sharp inhale, his eyes snapping open. For a second, he didn't know where he was. The adrenaline of the dream, the fire, the blood, the sound of Rosa screaming was still coursing through his veins, but then he registered the sensation. There was warmth pressed against him. There was a weight on his chest. There was the smell of vanilla and rain. He looked down. In the dim gray light filtering from the hallway, he saw Ivy. She was lying beside him, her face inches from his shoulder. Her arm was thrown across his bare chest, her palm resting directly over his pounding heart. The realization crashed into him like a physical blow. He was naked. She was in his bed. Ivy lifted her head. Her hair was messy, falling over one eye. Her face was flushed, her hazel eyes wide and dark in the shadows. She didn't look away. She didn't scramble backward in terror. She just looked at him. Her expression open and unguarded, Mateo's muscles locked. He became acutely aware of every inch of skin where they touched. The rough denim of her jeans against his leg, the softness of her cotton shirt against his arm, the heat of her palm on his skin. "Ivy," he breathed. It wasn't a question. It was a shock. He didn't pull away. He couldn't. His body, starved for touch after years of cold isolation, betrayed him. Instead of shoving her away, his hand moved on its own, coming up to cover hers where it rested on his chest. He trapped her hand there, pressing it harder against his skin. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice rough with sleep and lingering fear. "You are not supposed to be here." Ivy swallowed. She didn't move her hand. She could feel the erratic rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her fingers, fast and powerful. "The power went out," she whispered. "The alarm went off. I thought—" She trailed off, biting her lip. "I came in, and you were screaming in your sleep." Matteo closed his eyes for a brief second, shame washing over him. He hated weakness. He hated that she had seen him like this, stripped of his armor, fighting ghosts. "I do not scream," he muttered, though the defense was weak. "You looked like you were drowning," Ivy said softly. Her voice broke on the last word. "I could not just watch." The words hung in the air between them. "You looked like you were drowning." Matteo opened his eyes and looked at her. He saw the genuine fear she had felt for him. Not fear of him, but fear for him. No one had looked at him like that in a very long time. The air in the room shifted. The atmosphere changed from frantic concern to something heavier, thicker. The storm outside seemed to fade away, leaving only the sound of their breathing. Ivy became suddenly, painfully aware of the position they were in. She was lying in bed with her boss. He was naked under the sheet. Her leg was draped over his. She started to pull back. "I should go. I just wanted to make sure you were—" "Wait." Matteo's hand tightened over hers. He didn't want her to go. The thought of the empty, cold bed, of the nightmares waiting for him in the dark, was suddenly unbearable. He shifted, the movement rustling the sheets. He used his free hand to pull the duvet up higher, ensuring he was covered, but in doing so, he shifted his body toward her. "Do not go," he said, the command gone from his voice, replaced by a raw plea. He released her hand on his chest and reached up, his fingers grazing her jawline. His touch was hesitant, as if he expected her to shatter. Ivy's breath hitched. She went still, her eyes searching his. "Matteo, you are real," he murmured, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "You are warm." He slid his hand into the hair at the nape of her neck. He exerted the slightest pressure, not forcing her, just asking. Ivy didn't resist. She felt a magnetic pull, an undeniable gravity drawing her toward him. She shifted closer, her forehead resting against his. Their breaths mingled in the small space between them, his tasting of sleep, hers quick and shallow. "This is dangerous," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I know," Matteo replied. He tilted his head and closed the distance. His lips brushed hers. It was tentative at first, a question asked in the dark. Ivy let out a soft sigh, her eyes fluttering shut. That small sound broke something inside Matteo. He kissed her. It wasn't the smooth, practiced kiss of a playboy. It was desperate. It was aching. It was the kiss of a man who had been holding his breath for 10 years and was finally inhaling. His mouth moved over hers with a hunger that startled them both. Ivy responded instinctively. Her hand on his chest slid up, her fingers curling around his shoulder, gripping the hard muscle. She opened to him, allowing the kiss to deepen. Matteo groaned low in his throat. He shifted his arm, wrapping it around her waist, pulling her flush against him. The barrier of the duvet was between their lower bodies, but Ivy could feel the heat of him, the hardness of his chest against her breasts, the sheer power he held in check. His hand roamed down her back, pressing her closer, as if he wanted to merge her body with his, to absorb her warmth into his cold existence. For a moment, there was no mafia, no debts, no hospital bills. There was just the friction of lips, the tangle of limbs, and the overwhelming relief of being held. The kiss went on, slow and deep, tasting of longing and secrets. Ivy felt tears prick her eyes. She shouldn't want this. He was everything she was supposed to run from. But God, he made her feel safe in a way she never had before. Suddenly, the overhead lights blazed to life, the power grid reconnected with a loud thunk and a hum. The room was flooded with harsh, artificial brightness. The spell shattered instantly. Ivy gasped and pulled back, shielding her eyes. The reality of the room crashed back in. The expensive furniture, the sprawling bed, the man she worked for lying half-naked beneath her. Matteo blinked, his pupils constricting in the sudden light. He looked at Ivy, his lips swollen, his hair disheveled, his eyes dark with unmasked desire. Ivy scrambled backward, nearly falling off the bed. She stood up, her legs shaking so hard she had to grab the nightstand for balance. She smoothed her t-shirt down frantically, her face burning with a blush that went all the way to her chest. I am so sorry," she stammered, backing toward the door. I did not mean to." Mateo sat up, clutching the sheet to his waist. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by a stunned, guarded expression. "Ivy, I have to go," she said, her voice high and panicked. "I have to check the laundry. I have to go." She turned and ran. She fled the room, her footsteps pounding down the hallway, leaving the door wide open behind her. Mateo did not call after her. He sat alone in the center of the massive bed, his chest heaving. He brought his hand up to his mouth, touching his lips where he could still taste her. The silence of the penthouse returned, but it felt different now. It wasn't empty. It was charged, vibrating with the ghost of her touch. He looked at the empty space beside him where the mattress was still depressed from her weight. He felt a terrifying sensation settling in his gut. It wasn't just desire, it was possession. She had walked into his darkness, seen his demons, and instead of running, she had laid down beside him. Mateo fell back against the pillows and stared at the ceiling, the light burning his eyes. He knew, with absolute certainty, that everything had just changed. She had claimed a part of him that he thought was dead, and now that he knew what it felt like to be held by her, he wasn't sure he could ever go back to sleeping alone. The kitchen counter did not need to be scrubbed. It had been sanitized 3 times since sunrise, yet Ivy Hart was attacking the black granite with a sponge, as if it had personally offended her. Her arm muscles burned with the effort, but the physical exertion was the only thing keeping her mind from replaying the previous night on an endless, humiliating loop. She had slept in the bed of a mafia boss. She had held him. She had kissed him. The service elevator dinged, signaling the arrival of the grocery delivery. But before Ivy could move, Mateo walked into the kitchen. The air instantly left the room. Mateo was dressed for war in a sharp charcoal suit, his tie knotted with geometric precision, but his eyes were weary. And when they landed on Ivy, his step faltered for a fraction of a second. "Good morning," he said. His voice was stiff, formal. Ivy did not look at him. She focused intensely on a non-existent spot on the granite. "Good morning, Mr. Rinaldi. There is fresh coffee in the carafe. Mr. Rinaldi." The title hung between them like a shield. Mateo walked to the counter. He reached for a mug, his movements slow. He wanted to say something. He wanted to apologize for the nightmare, for the vulnerability, for the kiss that had kept him awake until dawn. But the words died in his throat. He was a man who commanded armies, yet he did not know how to talk to his maid about the fact that she tasted like vanilla and salvation. "Ivy," he started, "I need to go check the guest linens." Ivy interrupted, grabbing her bucket. She fled the room before he could stop her, leaving Mateo standing alone in the kitchen, gripping his empty mug until his knuckles turned white. Damon Cole stood in the doorway of the home office, his massive frame blocking the light. He watched Mateo staring out the window at the gray skyline of Ravenshore. Mateo had been staring at the same building for 20 minutes without turning a page of the report in his hand. "The Kovac crew hit one of our fronts in the garment district," Damon said, his voice a low rumble. "2 guys in the hospital, 1 dead." Mateo did not flinch, but his jaw tightened. "Send a team to secure the perimeter. Double the watch on the warehouses." "Already done," Damon said. He stepped into the room. "But we have another problem. Boss." Mateo turned. "What? You are distracted," Damon said bluntly. "You are looking at security feeds of the kitchen instead of the street. You are hesitating on calls." "I am not distracted," Mateo snapped, walking back to his desk. "It is the girl," Damon said. He didn't say it with malice, just cold, hard fact. "I saw the way you looked at her this morning. You are getting attached. And in our line of work, attachment is just a target painted on your back. If Kovac finds out you have a soft spot, he will stick a knife in it and twist." Mateo slammed the file shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Ivy is an employee. Nothing more. She cleans the floors and organizes the files. Do not presume to know my mind, Damon." "I do not have to know your mind," Damon said, meeting his boss's glare without blinking. "I just have to watch your eyes. Get rid of her, Matteo, before she gets someone killed." "Get out," Matteo ordered. Damon held his gaze for a second longer, then nodded and left. Matteo sat heavily in his chair. He knew Damon was right. The smart play, the safe play, was to fire Ivy Hart, give her a generous severance, and never see her again. But the thought of the penthouse without her, silent, cold, empty, made his chest ache with a physical pain. He could not do it. Instead of firing her, Matteo did the opposite. As the violence with the Kovac crew escalated, turning the streets of Ravenshore into a chessboard of ambushes and reprisals, Matteo became paranoid about security. He convinced himself that Ivy was safer inside the spire than she was in her flimsy apartment or at the hospital. "I need you to archive the old ledgers," Matteo told her the next day. "In my office. It is a sensitive task. You cannot leave the room." Ivy knew it was busy work. The ledgers were already in chronological order, but she didn't argue. Being in the office meant she was close to him, and despite her embarrassment, she felt safer when he was within arm's reach. For the next 3 days, they existed in a strange, heightened state of domesticity. Matteo worked at his desk, fielding calls that grew increasingly tense. Ivy sat on the floor or at the small side table, sorting papers. The barriers between them began to erode, worn down by proximity. On Wednesday, Ivy brought him a fresh cup of espresso. As she set it down, Matteo reached for it without looking. His hand brushed hers. His fingers were warm, rough with calluses. Ivy's hand was soft, cool. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through them both. They froze. Ivy looked down at their touching hands, then up at his face. Matteo was looking at her, his eyes dark and unreadable. For a second, the room wasn't an office. It was a vacuum where only they existed. Then Matteo slowly pulled his hand back, taking the cup. "Thank you," he murmured. "You are welcome," she whispered, her heart pounding. On Thursday, a lieutenant named Rocco came to the penthouse. Rocco was trying too hard, too much cologne, a suit that was too shiny, and a swagger that didn't match his rank. He spent 10 minutes bragging about how he would handle Kovac if he were in charge. From her corner, Ivy let out a quiet snort of disbelief. Rocco glared at her. Matteo looked up from his papers. He caught Ivy's eye. She raised an eyebrow and mimicked Rocco's swagger with a tiny roll of her shoulder. Matteo didn't laugh, but the corner of his mouth ticked upward. He looked at Rocco with renewed boredom. "That will be all, Rocco. The maid is unimpressed, and frankly, so am I." When Rocco left, sputtering, Matteo and Ivy shared a look. It was a conspiratorial smirk, a secret language built in the silence of the tower. By Friday evening, the tension in the room was palpable. Matteo had been on the phone for hours, his posture rigid. He rubbed the back of his neck constantly, the muscles there knotted like steel cables. Ivy watched him. She could see the pain radiating off him, the headache, the stress, the weight of the crown. Without thinking, she stood up and walked behind his chair. "You are going to snap a tendon if you keep hunching like that," she said softly. Matteo stiffened as she approached, but he didn't tell her to stop. Ivy placed her hands on his shoulders. Through the fine wool of his shirt, she could feel how hard he was holding himself together. She pressed her thumbs into the tight muscles at the base of his neck, working in small, firm circles. Matteo let out a long, ragged exhale. His head dropped forward slightly. He closed his eyes. The sensation of her hands on him was agonizingly good. It was grounding. For a minute. The war outside didn't exist. There was just the smell of her vanilla shampoo and the magic of her hands taking away his pain. "Is that better?" Ivy asked, her voice low. "Yes," Matteo breathed. "Do not stop." He reached up, his hand covering hers where it rested on his shoulder. He squeezed her fingers. It was a thank you, but it was also a plea. "Stay." The peace shattered an hour later. The phone on Matteo's desk rang. It was the red line, the emergency line. Matteo answered it on the first ring. Ivy, who was sorting files near the window, watched his face transform. The relaxation from her massage vanished instantly, replaced by a mask of cold fury. "How many?" Matteo asked. His voice was devoid of humanity. "Are you sure?" He listened for another moment, then slammed the receiver down so hard the plastic housing cracked. "Damn it," he roared. He swept his arm across the desk, sending a stack of files and a crystal tumbler crashing to the floor. The glass shattered, scattering shards across the Persian rug. Ivy jumped. Startled by the violence of the outburst, she saw him gripping the edge of the desk, his head hung low, breathing like a wounded animal. "Matteo?" she asked tentatively. "Is everyone okay?" Matteo whipped his head around. His eyes were wild. "Is everyone okay? No. Ivy. 2 of my men are bleeding out in a warehouse because a shipment was ambushed. Nothing is okay." "I'm sorry," Ivy said, taking a step toward him. "Is there anything I can do?" "No," Matteo snapped. "You can stop asking stupid questions. You can stop pretending you understand what is happening here. Go clean up the glass. That is what you're here for, isn't it?" The words were a lash. He didn't mean them. He was lashing out at the world, and she was just the closest target, but they landed with precision. Ivy stopped. Her face went pale, then flushed with anger, the fear that had been living in her chest for weeks, the terror for Noah, the stress of the money, the confusion of her feelings for this dangerous man. It all boiled over. "I am not your punching bag, Matteo," she said, her voice shaking but loud. Matteo looked at her, surprised by her tone. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Ivy said, stepping over the shattered glass. "I get that you are angry. I get that your world is on fire. But you do not get to treat me like garbage just because you are scared." "I am not scared," Matteo growled, stepping around the desk to tower over her. "Yes, you are," Ivy shouted back. She didn't back down. She tilted her head back to look him in the eye. "You are terrified. I see it. You are scared of losing control. You are scared of losing your people." "You know nothing about it," Matteo warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I know what fear looks like," Ivy cried, tears suddenly spilling over her lashes. "I live with it every single day. Do you think this is a game to me? I am here, working for a man who has people killed because my little brother is dying and I cannot pay for the machines that keep him alive." Matteo froze, the anger drained out of him, replaced by shock. "Every time my phone rings, I think it is the hospital telling me he is gone," Ivy sobbed, her hands curling into fists at her sides. "I'm holding it together by a thread. Matteo, I am the only person in this entire building who actually worries about you. Not the boss, not the paycheck, but you. And you treat me like the help." She wiped her face aggressively, furious at her own tears. "I am tired. I'm so tired of being scared." Matteo stared at her. He saw the raw, bleeding honesty in her face. She was right. Everyone else feared him or used him. She was the only one who saw him. The distance between them vanished. "Ivy," he groaned. He stepped forward and cupped her face in his hands. His touch was rough, desperate. He wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "I am sorry," he rasped. "I'm so sorry." Ivy looked up at him, her breath hitching. She saw the regret in his eyes, but behind it, she saw the fire that had been smoldering between them since the night of the storm. "Matteo," she whispered. He didn't give her a chance to say anything else. He crashed his mouth down on hers. This wasn't like the kiss in the bedroom. That had been gentle, dreamlike. This was a collision. It was frantic and starving. It was an apology and a confession all at once. Ivy gasped. Opening her mouth to him, she grabbed the lapels of his jacket, pulling him closer. Matteo's arms wrapped around her waist, lifting her effortlessly. He backed her up until her lower back hit the edge of the kitchen island. He hoisted her up onto the counter. Ivy wrapped her legs around his waist, pulling him into the cradle of her hips. The friction was electric. Matteo groaned into her mouth, his hands tangling in her hair, tilting her head back to deepen the kiss. "You make me crazy," he muttered against her lips. "You make me lose my mind." "Good," Ivy breathed, her hands roaming over his chest, feeling the frantic beat of his heart through his shirt. "Lose it." Matteo kissed her jaw, her neck, the sensitive spot behind her ear. His hands roamed over her body, memorizing the curves of her waist, the denim of her jeans, the softness of her shirt. He was starving for her warmth. He wanted to crawl inside her skin and hide from the cold world he ruled. Ivy arched into him, her fingers digging into his shoulders. She felt powerful and helpless at the same time. This man, who terrified an entire city, was trembling in her arms. They were pressed together, chest to chest, hip to hip. The air in the kitchen was thick with the sound of their ragged breathing and the friction of clothes. It was intense, bordering on overwhelming, but it remained grounded. They didn't undress. They didn't cross the final line. They just clung to each other, seeking solace in the physical connection, trying to drown out the sirens and the gunshots and the hospital bills with the sheer force of their need. Mateo buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling her scent. He held her tightly, his grip bruising but protective. For a long minute, they just stayed like that, tangled together on the kitchen counter, shaking in the aftermath of the emotional explosion. Slowly, the reality of the room began to seep back in. The shattered glass on the floor, the cracked phone on the desk, the darkness outside the window. Ivy pulled back slightly. Her lips were swollen, her eyes dazed. She looked at Mateo, really looked at him, and saw the conflict warring behind his eyes. "Mateo," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What are we doing?" Mateo rested his forehead against hers. He kept his hands on her waist, refusing to let go just yet. "I do not know. We cannot keep doing this," Ivy said. She gently untangled her legs from his waist and placed her hands on his chest, creating a small distance. "I cannot be your distraction, and I cannot be your secret. Not with Noah. Not with everything at stake." Mateo stepped back. The loss of contact was physical. He felt cold instantly. He ran a hand through his hair, messing up the perfect style. "It is not a distraction," Mateo said, his voice low and serious. "But Damon was right. You are a weakness." Ivy flinched as if he had slapped her. "Let me finish," Mateo said quickly, reaching for her hand but stopping short. "I do not know how to love someone without destroying them. Ivy, my world is poison. Look at tonight. Look at the glass on the floor. If I let you in, if I let us happen, I bring that poison to your door, to Noah's door." Ivy slid off the counter. She stood on her own 2 feet, smoothing her shirt. The passion was cooling into a heavy, aching sadness. "So that is it?" she asked. "You are the big bad wolf, so you have to be alone." "I'm trying to protect you," Mateo said. The desperation in his voice was clear. "I cannot protect you if you are the thing I care about most. My enemies will see it. They will use you to break me." "Maybe I do not want to be protected," Ivy said quietly. "Maybe I just want to be with you." "You do not know what you are asking for," Mateo said. He looked at her with a profound, tragic longing. "I am not a hero, Ivy. I am the villain in this story." Ivy looked at him, at the man who had covered her with a blanket, who'd eaten cookies in secret, who had kissed her like she was the only air in the room. "I think you are wrong," she said. She walked past him, stepping carefully over the broken glass. She didn't look back. Mateo stood alone in the wreckage of his office. He looked at the shattered crystal, then at the door where she had disappeared. The taste of her was still on his lips, a haunting reminder of the life he wanted but was terrified to claim. The tension in the room was unresolved, hanging heavy and thick, a storm cloud waiting to burst. He knew, with a sinking feeling in his gut, that this wasn't over. It was just the beginning of the fall. The silence in the penthouse had changed. It was no longer the quiet of luxury or the hush of privacy. It was the suffocating, heavy silence of a tomb before the stone is rolled away. Matteo Rinaldi stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the city of Ravenshore. The glass reflected a man who looked like he was slowly being carved out of stone. His eyes were red-rimmed, his jaw set in a line of grim endurance. Behind him, the sprawling living room felt vast and empty, filled only with the tension that radiated from Damon Cole. "We lost another warehouse," Damon said. His voice was a low rumble, devoid of its usual steady confidence. The shipment from the harbor. They knew the exact route. Mateo, they knew the shift change. They hit us 3 minutes after the new guards went on duty. Mateo did not turn around. How? You know how, Damon said, stepping closer. We have a leak. A rat. Someone inside the inner circle is feeding the Kovac crew everything we do. We've checked everyone, Mateo said, his voice tight. Rocco, the lieutenants, the drivers. They have been with me for a decade. Not everyone, Damon corrected quietly. Mateo spun around, his eyes flashing dangerous fire. Stop! I am your head of security, Damon said, not backing down. It is my job to be the paranoid one. Look at the timeline. Mateo, the leak started 3 weeks ago. Who walked into this penthouse 3 weeks ago? Who hears your phone calls? Who organizes your office? Who sleeps in your bed? She is a maid, Mateo snapped. She is 22 years old. She scrubs floors to pay for her brother's medical bills. Or so she says, Damon countered. It is the perfect cover, the desperate sister, the innocent girl who stumbles into the big bad wolf's lair. It makes you trust her. It makes you weak. Mateo slammed his hand against the glass. The sound vibrated through the room. Enough! Unless you have proof. You do not speak her name. I will get you proof, Damon said ominously. He turned and walked out, leaving Mateo alone with the sick, curling smoke of suspicion in his gut. Mateo wanted to reject it. He wanted to believe that the connection he felt with Ivy, the raw, honest heat between them, was real. But he had been raised in a world where betrayal was the most common currency. He started replaying the last few days in his mind, searching for cracks. He remembered Ivy taking a hushed phone call in the laundry room, her voice dropping to a whisper when he walked by. He remembered her disappearing for 2 hours on Tuesday without explanation. He remembered the way she looked at him sometimes, with a mixture of fear and calculation. Was it fear for him, or fear of him? Ivy could feel the change in the air as if the temperature had dropped 20 degrees. For the last 2 days, the penthouse had felt like a prison. The guards who used to nod at her now stared with cold, hard eyes. When she walked into a room, conversations stopped abruptly. She was scrubbing the marble foyer, her knees aching, when she heard Damon's voice drifting from the open door of the security office down the hall. Keep a tail on her, Damon was saying. If she makes contact with anyone from Kovac's side, take them both. I do not care what the boss says. He is compromised. Ivy froze, the sponge dripping soapy water onto the floor. Compromised. The word hit her like a physical blow. They thought she was the leak. They thought she was betraying Mateo. Panic clawed at her throat. She thought of Noah, lying in his hospital bed, waiting for the treatment that her paycheck provided. If Mateo fired her, Noah would suffer. But it was worse than that. In Mateo's world, they didn't just fire traitors. They made them disappear. She stood up, her hands trembling. She needed to talk to someone. She needed to fix the mess with the hospital billing before she lost her job. Or worse, she pulled her phone out and dialed the number for Mrs. Gable, the new social worker assigned to Noah's case. I can meet you, Ivy whispered into the phone, glancing over her shoulder at the security camera blinking in the corner. I cannot talk here. It is not safe. I will come to the hospital parking lot in an hour. She hung up and hurried to the service elevator, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She didn't see the shadow detach itself from the wall at the end of the hallway. She didn't see Damon speak into his radio. Subject is moving. I am in pursuit. The afternoon sun was blinding as Ivy stood in the far corner of the St. Jude's Hospital parking lot. She was wearing her oversized hoodie, her arms crossed tight across her chest against the wind. A gray sedan pulled up, and a woman stepped out, Mrs. Gable was middle-aged, wearing a trench coat and looking perpetually tired. To an observer, she looked like anyone or no one. I brought the debt relief forms, Mrs. Gable said, handing Ivy a thick manila envelope. We need to file these by tomorrow if you want to stop the collections agency from freezing your accounts. Thank you, Ivy said, taking the envelope. I brought the bank statements you asked for. Ivy reached into her bag and pulled out a stack of papers, her own bank records, folded and crumpled. She handed them to Mrs. Gable. "It is going to be tight, Ivy," Mrs. Gable warned, looking at the papers. "Even with the relief, the new medication is expensive." "I will find the money," Ivy said, her voice fierce. "I always find the money. Just keep him on the list." They spoke for another 10 minutes, their heads bent close together against the wind. It was a conversation about poverty, about the crushing weight of the American healthcare system, about the desperation of a sister trying to save her brother, but from 50 yards away, through the lens of a long-range camera, it looked very different. Damon Cole sat in his black SUV, the shutter of his camera clicking rapidly. He saw the secretive meeting spot. He saw the exchange of a thick envelope. He saw the intense, huddled conversation. He saw Ivy handing over documents. "Got you," Damon whispered. Night had fallen by the time Ivy returned to the penthouse. She felt drained, her head aching from the stress of the meeting and the fear of the debt. She let herself in, expecting the usual quiet. Instead, she walked into a storm. Mateo was standing in the center of the living room. He was not wearing his jacket. His sleeves were rolled up, his tie was gone, and he was holding a glass of whiskey that he hadn't touched on the coffee table in front of him. Scattered like a winning hand of poker cards were glossy photographs. Ivy stopped. "Mateo?" He turned slowly. The look on his face stopped her heart. It wasn't anger. It was devastation hardened into ice. "Where were you?" he asked. His voice was soft, terrifyingly calm. I went to the hospital," Ivy stammered, setting her bag down. "I told the guard at the desk." "Who did you meet?" Ivy blinked. "What? Do not lie to me. Ivy!" Mateo roared. The sudden volume made her jump. He snatched up one of the photos and threw it at her. It fluttered through the air and landed at her feet. Ivy looked down. It was a picture of her in the parking lot, handing the bank statements to Mrs. Gable. "Who is the handler?" Mateo demanded, stepping closer. "Is she with Kovac, or is she a broker? How much did they pay you to sell out my men?" Ivy stared at him, her brain struggling to catch up. "What? No, Mateo, that is Mrs. Gable. She's a social worker." "A social worker," Mateo repeated, his lip curling in a sneer. "You meet social workers in the back of parking lots to exchange packages. You think I am stupid?" "It was paperwork," Ivy cried, stepping forward. "It was financial aid forms for Noah. I met her outside because I was ashamed to do it in the lobby where people could hear me begging for money." "Liar," Mateo hissed. The word cut through the air like a knife. "Damon saw you. You looked nervous. You looked guilty. And 3 hours after that meeting, my shipment was hit. Exact coordinates. Coordinates that were in the files you were organizing yesterday." Ivy felt the blood drain from her face. "I did not. I would never." "I trusted you," Mateo said, his voice breaking. The pain in his eyes was raw, bleeding through the anger. "I let you into my home. I let you into my bed, and you used it. You used me." The accusation hit Ivy harder than any physical blow could have. She looked at the man she had fallen for, the man she had held through his nightmares, the man she had massaged and kissed and comforted, and she realized that despite everything, he didn't know her. He didn't see her. He only saw the monster he expected everyone to be. Something inside her snapped. The fear evaporated, replaced by a white-hot fury. "You idiot," Ivy whispered. Mateo blinked. "Excuse me?" "You absolute damaged idiot," Ivy shouted. She reached into her bag and ripped out the manila envelope Mrs. Gable had given her. She threw it at his chest. Papers exploded everywhere. Forms for indigent medical relief, kidney transplant waitlist, and financial hardship declaration. "Read it," Ivy screamed, tears finally spilling over. "Read the treason, Mateo. Look at how I sold you out. It is an application for charity because I cannot afford to keep my brother alive." Mateo looked down at the papers scattered on the Persian rug. He saw the words Stage 4 renal failure and poverty line exception. He froze. The anger began to crack, doubt seeping in. "Ivy." "No." Ivy backed away from him, shaking her head. "Do not you dare. You want to know the truth? I took this job because I was desperate." I scrubbed your toilets and organized your mess and listened to your threats because I needed the money. But I stayed because of you." She wiped her face aggressively. "I stayed because I thought I saw a human being under those expensive suits. I thought you were different. I thought we were the same. Two lonely people trying to protect the ones we love." She let out a harsh, broken laugh. "But Damon was right. You are not a man. You are just a boss, and I am just the maid you slept with to feel better about yourself." "That is not true," Mateo said, taking a step toward her, his hand reaching out. "Ivy, please, the evidence is that you do not trust me," Ivy said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You never did. You were just waiting for me to betray you like everyone else." She looked around the penthouse, the glass cage she had started to think of as a home. "I cannot stay here. I cannot be with a man who looks at me and sees a traitor." "Ivy, wait," Mateo said, panic rising in his chest. "We can talk about this. If I am wrong—" "You are wrong," Ivy said. "But it does not matter anymore." She turned and walked to the small staff room. She came out 2 minutes later with her backpack. She didn't look at Mateo. She walked straight to the elevator. "Do not walk out that door," Mateo commanded, his voice shaking. "It is not safe out there." Ivy pressed the button. She looked at him one last time. Her hazel eyes were dull, the light in them extinguished. "I was never safe here. Mateo, I just fooled myself into thinking I was—" The doors slid shut, cutting off his view of her face. Mateo stood in the silence of the penthouse. The papers, the proof of her innocence and her poverty, lay scattered around his feet like fallen leaves. He felt a sickness rising in his throat. He dropped to his knees and picked up one of the forms. It was an application for a grant to pay for dialysis. The date was today. "God," Mateo whispered. The phone in his pocket buzzed. He ignored it. It buzzed again, and again he pulled it out with a shaking hand. It was Damon. "What?" Mateo answered, his voice dead. "Boss," Damon said, sounding breathless. "We have a problem, a big one." "I know," Mateo said, looking at the empty elevator. "I messed up. Damon, she is innocent." "No, listen to me," Damon said urgently. "The Kovac crew just hit the convoy on Route 9, the one we routed through the tunnels." Mateo frowned. "So, that confirms the leak." "Mateo," Damon said slowly, "we only planned the tunnel route 20 minutes ago, in the car, after the girl had already left the building, after she was gone." The world stopped spinning. If the route was planned 20 minutes ago, Ivy couldn't have known it. She was already in the elevator. She was already gone. She wasn't the leak. She had never been the leak. The realization crashed over Mateo with the force of a tidal wave. He had accused her. He had screamed at her. He had driven her away. He had sent the only person who had ever truly loved him out into the night, alone and unprotected. "Where is she?" Mateo demanded, Atis scrambling to his feet. "Damon, where is she?" "She took a cab," Damon said, "from the front entrance, 5 minutes ago." "Track it," Mateo roared, running toward the door. "Get a team! Find her now!" Ivy sat in the back of the yellow taxi, watching the city blur past through a veil of tears. She'd given the driver her home address, but she didn't really want to go there. The apartment would be empty and cold. Noah was at the hospital. She was completely alone. She wiped her eyes, angry at herself for crying over a criminal. She should have known better. Lena had warned her. The world had warned her. The taxi turned down a narrow street near the industrial district, taking a shortcut toward the bridge. "Hey," Ivy said, leaning forward. "This is not the way to the highway." The driver didn't answer. He was staring in the rearview mirror, his eyes wide. "Sir?" Ivy asked. Suddenly, high beams flooded the car from behind. A black SUV slammed into the rear bumper of the taxi. Spinning it out, Ivy screamed. Grabbing the handle as the world tilted, the taxi skidded across the wet asphalt, slamming into a parked van with a bone-jarring crunch. Glass shattered, the airbag deployed, hitting Ivy in the face with the smell of burning dust. She gasped, coughing, trying to orient herself. Her head was spinning. She fumbled for the door handle. "Get out!" a voice shouted. The back door was ripped open. Hands, rough, gloved hands, grabbed her arms. "Let me go!" Ivy screamed, kicking out. "Eh?" She connected with a shin, but the man didn't even flinch. She was dragged out of the wrecked taxi onto the cold pavement. 3 men stood around her, their faces covered by black ski masks. They held compact submachine guns. One of them, a man with a distinct scar over his eye visible through the mask hole, grabbed her face, forcing her to look at him. "You are the Maid," he grunted, his accent thick. "The one Rinaldi keeps in his tower." "I am nobody," Ivy sobbed, struggling against the grip. "I quit. I am not with him anymore." The man laughed. It was a cruel sound. "He cares about you, little girl. We have seen the way he watches you, and that makes you very valuable." "Please," Ivy begged. "I have a brother. He needs me. Rinaldi needs to learn a lesson," the man said. He pulled a black hood from his belt. "And you are going to be the teacher." He shoved the hood over her head, plunging her into darkness. Ivy screamed one last time, screaming Matteo's name before a rough hand clamped over her mouth and she was shoved into the back of the waiting SUV. Tires screeched as the vehicle sped away into the night, leaving the wrecked taxi and the shattered remains of Ivy's life behind on the wet street. High above, in the penthouse, Matteo Rinaldi stared at the tracking dot on his phone screen as it stopped moving, then vanished completely. He let out a roar of pure, primal rage that echoed through the empty tower. A king who had destroyed his own heart and was now ready to burn the world down to get it back. The screen of the tablet on Matteo's desk flickered, the pixels resolving into a grainy, dimly lit image that made the blood in his veins turn to ice. The video showed a warehouse interior, smelling of rust and damp concrete even through the screen. In the center of the frame, bound to a metal chair with thick zip ties, was Ivy. Her lip was split, a jagged line of red against her pale skin, and a dark bruise was blooming across her left cheekbone. Matteo stopped breathing. Behind her stood Marek Kovac, the leader of the rival faction. He smiled at the camera, a predator baring his teeth. Distinct message: Rinaldi. Marek sneered, his hand resting casually on Ivy's shoulder. She flinched but did not look away. Instead, she spat at his shoes. Marek backhanded her, hard. Ivy's head snapped to the side, but she whipped it back around, her hazel eyes blazing with a defiance that terrified Matteo more than her fear would have. "You have 24 hours, Marek said to the camera. "I want the deeds to the waterfront warehouses. I want the names of your contacts in the precinct, and I want you to come alone to the old shipyard. If you try anything, if I see one other car, I send her back to you in pieces." The screen went black. Matteo stood there, the silence of the penthouse roaring in his ears, the image of Ivy, bloodied, beaten, and alone because he had cast her out, burned into his retinas. He felt a cracking sensation in his chest, the sound of the iron walls he had built around his heart finally shattering. "We cannot give him the waterfront," Damon said from the doorway. His voice was grim, pragmatic. "If we give him the ports, the syndicate is finished. We lose everything." Matteo looked up. His eyes were not the cold, dead eyes of a boss. They were the frantic, desperate eyes of a man who had lost his soul. "I do not care about the ports," Matteo said. His voice was low, trembling with a rage that shook the room. "I do not care about the syndicate. I do not care about the empire." Damon stepped forward. "Matteo, think. She's just one girl. If you surrender, you lose your power, you lose your life." "She is not just one girl," Matteo roared, slamming his fist onto the mahogany desk so hard the wood splintered. "She's the only thing in this miserable life that has ever made sense. I love her. Damon, do you hear me? I love her." The admission hung in the air, raw and undeniable. "I drove her away," Matteo whispered, the anger collapsing into grief. "I accused her. I put her in that chair. If she dies, I die. It is that simple." Damon stared at him for a long moment. He had served Matteo for 10 years. He had seen him order hits, negotiate wars, and bury friends, but he had never seen him human. Until now. "Then we do not surrender," Damon said, pulling his gun from his holster and checking the chamber. "We go to war." "No," Matteo said, his mind sharpening into a lethal focus. "If we go in guns blazing, they kill her before we breach the door. I have to play their game. I have to make them think they have won. He walked to the wall safe and began pulling out weapons. Hidden blades, a compact pistol, flashbang grenades. I'm going in alone, Mateo said. I will give them the surrender they want. I will make Merrick feel like a king. And while he is gloating, you and the Bravo team will cut the power grid to the shipyard. When the lights go out, I get her. It is suicide, Damon warned. If the timing is off by 1 second, you are dead. Mateo looked at the dark window, seeing Ivy's face in the reflection. Then do not be late. The warehouse was freezing. Ivy shivered, the cold seeping through her thin jacket, but she refused to give Merrick the satisfaction of seeing her tremble. Her wrists screamed in protest against the plastic ties, and her face throbbed where he had hit her. You are quiet, little maid, Merrick mocked, pacing in front of her. Rinaldi must have paid you well to keep your mouth shut. Ivy looked up at him through swollen eyelids. He paid better than you, and he dresses better, too. You look like you bought that suit at a discount store. Merrick stopped pacing. His face darkened. You have a sharp tongue. Maybe I should cut it out. Go ahead, Ivy challenged, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. But if you think Matteo Rinaldi is going to hand over his city for me, you are stupid. He fired me. He thinks I am a traitor. He's probably throwing a party right now. She said it to hurt Merrick, to make him think she was worthless leverage. But inside, the words cut her deeply. She remembered Matteo's face in the penthouse, the disgust, the accusation. Liar, he wasn't coming. Why would he? She was just the help. She was just a mistake he had made in the dark. But as the thought settled, a heavy metal door creaked open at the far end of the warehouse. Every head turned. Merrick's men raised their rifles. Matteo walked in. He was alone. He wore a black coat, his hands held out to his sides, palms open to show he was unarmed. He walked with a slow, defeated gait. His shoulders slumped. He looked smaller than Ivy had ever seen him. Stop! Merrick barked. Matteo stopped 10 yards away. He didn't look at Merrick. He looked straight at Ivy. His gaze swept over her. The blood, the bruises, the way she was tied like an animal. Ivy saw something break in his expression. The mask of the mafia boss crumbled, revealing sheer, agonizing guilt. Well, Merrick laughed, clapping his hands. The king of Ravenshore, kneeling for a servant girl. Let her go, Merrick, Matteo said. His voice was hoarse. You have me. You have the territory. Let her walk out. I do not think so. Merrick stepped behind Ivy, pressing the cold barrel of a gun to her temple. Ivy squeezed her eyes shut, a tear leaking out. I think I keep her, as insurance, or maybe just for fun. Matteo took a step forward, his hands twitching. Do not touch her. Or what? Merrick sneered. You are alone. Rinaldi. You are nothing. Matteo ignored him. He looked at Ivy again, locking eyes with her. The intensity of his stare burned through the fear. Ivy, he said softly. The sound of her name on his lips made her open her eyes. I was wrong. The warehouse went silent. Even Merrick seemed confused by the sudden shift. I should have trusted you, Matteo continued, his voice ringing clear in the damp air. I was a fool. I was scared of what you made me feel. So I pushed you away. But I am here now, and I am not leaving without you. Ivy stared at him, her breath catching in her throat. He wasn't negotiating for the syndicate. He was apologizing. He was telling her, in front of 20 killers, that she mattered more than his pride. Matteo, she whispered. I love you, Matteo said. Merrick burst out laughing. How touching, a tragic romance. Too bad it ends with, now, Matteo screamed. The world went black. The overhead lights died instantly as Damon cut the main line outside, in the same second. Matteo dropped to his knees, pulling 2 flashbangs from his sleeves and hurling them forward. Bang, bang! The explosions were deafening, blinding white lights searing the darkness. Chaos erupted. Merrick screamed, firing blindly into the dark. Matteo moved. He didn't run away. He ran toward the gunshots. He knew exactly where Ivy was. He had memorized her position. Get down, he roared. Launching himself at the chair, he tackled Ivy, tipping the chair over, shielding her body with his own as bullets chewed up the concrete floor around them. He felt a sharp, searing burn across his left shoulder, like a hot poker branding his skin. But he didn't stop. He pulled a knife from his boot, slashing the zip ties on her wrists and ankles with frantic precision. "Can you run?" he shouted over the noise of returning fire from the skylights. Damon's team had breached the roof. "Yes!" Ivy cried, grabbing his arm. "Stay behind me!" Mateo hauled her up, keeping his body between her and the muzzle flashes. He returned fire with the pistol he had taped to the small of his back. Dropping two of Merrick's men who blocked the exit, they sprinted toward the side door, slipping on wet concrete. Hearts pounding in unison, they burst out into the cool night air, where a black sedan was waiting. Engine roaring, rear door open, they dove inside. Damon slammed the accelerator before the door was even closed, tires screeching as they peeled away from the shipyard, leaving the gunfire and the burning empire behind. The safe house was a small cabin 20 miles north of the city limit, hidden deep in the pine woods. It was silent. Save for the sound of wind in the trees and the crackle of a fire Damon had hastily started in the bathroom. Ivy was washing Mateo's blood off her hands. She turned off the tap and grabbed a towel, her hands shaking so badly she dropped it. She picked it up, took a deep breath, and walked back into the main room. Mateo was sitting on a wooden chair, his shirt stripped off. The graze on his shoulder was ugly, a deep furrow of torn flesh, but it had missed the bone and the artery. Damon had already cleaned it and was packing his gear in the corner. "I will give you 2 a minute," Damon muttered. Stepping outside onto the porch, Ivy walked over to Mateo. She picked up the roll of gauze and the antiseptic. "This is going to sting," she whispered. "I know," Mateo said. He didn't look at the wound. He looked at her. He watched her face as she worked, studying the bruise on her cheek, the split in her lip. "I am sorry. Look at you. I did this." "You did not hit me," Ivy said, dabbing the wound gently. "Merrick did. I put you in his path," Mateo said, his voice heavy with self-loathing. "I should have known. I should have protected you." Ivy finished taping the bandage. She set the supplies down and stepped between his knees, placing her hands on his face. "You came for me," she said fiercely. "You walked into a room full of guns with nothing but your bare hands. You took a bullet for me. I would take 1,000, Mateo said. He reached up, his fingers curling around her wrists, holding her like she was the only solid thing in the universe. "When I saw that video, when I thought I had lost you, the city meant nothing. The money meant nothing. You said you loved me," Ivy whispered, searching his eyes. "Back there. Did you mean it?" Mateo pulled her closer until her forehead rested against his. "I have never meant anything more in my life. I love you, Ivy. I love your stubbornness. I love how you fight for your brother. I love that you are the only person who ever looked at me and saw a man, not a monster." Ivy let out a sob, half laugh, half cry. She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his good shoulder. "I love you too. You idiot." Mateo closed his eyes, holding her tight, breathing in the scent of her hair, smoke and survival. "We cannot go back," he murmured against her ear. "They will never stop hunting us. Not as long as Matteo Rinaldi is alive. So let him die," Ivy said, pulling back to look at him. "Let the boss die. I do not want the boss anyway. I just want Matteo." Matteo looked at her, and for the first time in his life, he saw a future that didn't end in a prison cell or a coffin. "Okay," he said, "let him die." The funeral of Matteo Rinaldi was a closed casket affair. The car explosion on the bridge had been violent, leaving little to bury. The city whispered about the tragedy, the Mafia king taken out by his rivals. The Kovac crew claimed victory, but their victory was short-lived as the police, mysteriously tipped off with mountains of evidence, raided their entire operation a week later. Damon Cole took over what was left of the Rinaldi syndicate. He dissolved the violent assets, kept the legitimate businesses, and ran a quiet, profitable logistics company. He never spoke of his former boss, except to say he was gone. 6 months later, The town of Seabrook was a sleepy coastal village where the loudest noise was the crashing of waves against the cliffs. In a small garage at the edge of town, a mechanic named Matt wiped grease from his hands with a rag. He wore blue coveralls with a name tag that was slightly crooked. He wasn't rich. He didn't wear Italian suits, but he smiled more in the last 6 months than he had in 35 years. He locked up the shop and walked down the street to a small white house with a porch that needed painting. Inside, the house smelled of garlic and roasting chicken. A 12-year-old boy was sitting at the kitchen table, looking healthy and vibrant, doing his math homework. "Hey, Noah," Matt said, ruffling the boy's hair. "How are the numbers?" "Easy," Noah grinned. "Ivy says I have to finish before dinner or no dessert. She is a tyrant," Matt whispered conspiratorially. "I heard that." Ivy walked in from the garden, holding a basket of fresh tomatoes. She wore a simple sundress, her hair loose and wavy. The bruises were long gone, replaced by a golden tan and a light in her eyes that outshone the sun. She walked over to Mateo, and kissed him on the cheek. "Go wash up. You smell like motor oil." "It is the smell of honest work," Mateo teased, pulling her in for a real kiss, ignoring her protests about the grease. That night, the windows were open to the sound of the ocean. Noah was asleep in his room, safe and healthy, his treatments fully paid for by an anonymous insurance settlement that Damon had arranged before the end. Mateo lay in bed, shirtless, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above. He felt a profound sense of peace. The nightmares of gunfire and blood had faded, replaced by the quiet rhythm of a normal life. The mattress dipped. Ivy climbed in beside him. She didn't stay on her side. She moved to the center, curling her body around his, her head resting on his chest, her leg draped over his legs. Mateo smiled in the dark. He wrapped his arm around her, pulling her closer, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his ribs. "You are doing it again," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep and contentment. "Doing what?" Ivy mumbled into his skin. "Claiming me," Mateo said. "Like you own the place." Ivy lifted her head, propping her chin on his chest. She smiled, a wicked, beautiful curve of her lips. "I do own the place. I paid the rent this month." Mateo laughed, a rich, warm sound. "Fair enough." "Besides," Ivy whispered, tracing the faint white scar on his shoulder where the bullet had grazed him, a permanent reminder of the night he chose her. "I claimed you a long time ago. Mateo, you just finally realized you wanted to be caught." "I am yours," he promised, kissing her forehead. "Always." She settled back down, holding him tight. There were no guards outside the door. There was no gun on the nightstand. There was just the man and the woman who had saved each other, drifting off to sleep in a modest hidden home, partners who had chosen love over the empire, finally safe in the open light. Thank you so much for reading this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Mateo and Ivy from the dangerous heights of the Mafia Tower to their quiet life by the sea. I would love to hear what you thought of the ending. Please leave a comment down below telling me where you are listening from and what your favorite part of the story was. If you enjoyed this, please make sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. Your support means the world to us. See you in the next story.